So we want to get you started by being able to talk to one another. Before we do that, you guys will notice we have little cards in the middle of the table. Hopefully you see those little note cards. That's to write any questions you may have for our speakers today. Okay, so if you have any questions that come up, write them on those cards, because we take those and we use them for a question and answer that we're going to do later on in the presentation. Okay? All right, so we have a table discussion question for you. You can see it there on your notes. What knowledge or experience do you have of Celebrate Recovery, if any, and what do you hope to get out of our mental health community today? So spend some time talking to each other. If you're at a table by yourself, I guess you could talk to yourself, but you could also join another table. So go for it, and we'll bring you in a bit. Anyways, we do testimonies here at our mental health community, and so we've got a testimony this week. Nicole Jones is going to come up and share her story. Come on up, Nicole. Give her a big welcome. It's all yours.
Can you hear me? Hi. In Celebrate Recovery, we write down our testimony, and I'm grateful for that rule today as I nervously read it. I'm a grateful believer and follower in my Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. I'm finding freedom in anger, perfectionism, codependency, depression, and grief. My name is Nicole. I was the first in my family to be born in the United States by two Jamaican natives that met and got married in New York. I'm affectionately known as a Jamaican. Shortly after I was born, my family moved from New York to Maryland. However, over the next few years, due to physical abuse, promises from my dad that he got help, and my mom wanted to save her marriage, my mom and I moved multiple times between New York and Maryland. Unfortunately, with undiagnosed mental illness, abuse, and threats of harming himself and me during one of my visits with my dad was fatally injured in the line of fire when police were helping me and my maternal grandmother escape out of a back window of our home. At 6 years old, most of my paternal family didn't want anything to do with me, blaming my mom and I for his death. Despite the abuse of my dad and disowning of his family, my mom never spoke poorly about me, about my dad, or his family. However, for me, this rejection led to decades of codependency, where feelings of never being good enough, people-pleasing, and perfectionism started. Since we never talked about what happened, I never learned how to express my feelings, so the suppression of my feelings resulted in depression, anger, resentment, and holding grudges. Thankfully, my mom and maternal grandmother modeled having a relationship with God, which became an anchor in my life, and I dedicated my heart to God at 7 years old. However, I never felt like I belonged and constantly looked to others for approval. During my teenage years, I stepped away from my faith and I searched to belong, but God's love never ceased, and I rededicated my life to God after I got married. We have a beautiful daughter together, and after several family moves for his career, we moved to California, where I became a member of Saddleback Church. While I still had a relationship with God, I proudly wore my identity of being a wife and a mother like a badge of honor. In 2018, after over 17 years of marriage, my husband told me that he wanted a divorce and was moving out of state for a new job opportunity. Once again, feelings of rejection and abandonment resurfaced, and I could barely get out of bed. I fought through thoughts of suicide because I truly didn't want to live anymore. However, my daughter gave me a reason to not give up and to keep fighting through this dark season of hopelessness. During this time, I desperately read my Bible and prayed to God each day to restore my marriage. This verse gave me hope. The thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy. I have come that they may have life and have it to the full. John 10:10. At this time, I realized that I had put so much of my identity into being a wife instead of my identity as a child of God, which no one could ever take away from me. It eventually came out that the divorce was a consequence of an affair, and when my prayers of reconciliation were not answered the way I expected, God led me to support groups such as Separated Wives, A Time to Heal, and eventually Divorce Care. As the Time to Heal study was coming to an end, one of the women invited me to attend Celebrate Recovery with her. When I told my daughter I was going to Celebrate Recovery, she asked, "What are you celebrating recovery from?" I told her I didn't know, but I was going to find out. It is through the support of God, family, and friends, those support groups, years of counseling, Celebrate Recovery, that I took small steps to find freedom from anger, codependency, depression, and the pain of grief of shattered dreams. In Celebrate Recovery, Principle 2 states, "Earnestly believe that God exists, that I matter to him, and that he has the power to help me recover. Happy are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted." Matthew 5:4. God has comforted me in my pain, showed me I am loved, and while others may abandon me, he never will. I learned how to use my voice, express my feelings, ask for what I need by setting healthy boundaries for myself, and to choose joy again as I allow God to use my brokenness and pain by completing my first step study, becoming a Celebrate Recovery leader, a mental health champion, and an advocate for the mental health ministry within Celebrate Recovery here at Lake Forest. My daughter and I overcame many hardships through the family changes, and our relationship has a strong connection and is healthy and thriving. This life of recovery and healing is an ongoing journey and doesn't have a finish line. With my daughter away at college for the last 2 years and no family in Orange County, I don't know when or if God will lead me back east to be closer to family. But until then, I hold on to the words of Philippians 4:13. I can do all this through him who gives me strength. And Jeremiah 29:11, for I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord. Plans to prosper you and not to harm you. Plans to give you a hope and a future. Thanks for letting me share.
Thanks so much, Nicole. Appreciate that. It's always good to hear our stories, right? Because this is life. This is what we live together, but we get to do it together. That's what this whole community is all about. Well, I get to introduce our speakers today and good friends, so this is really easy. But Jeni and Jeni Baker are the global executive directors of Celebrate Recovery. Jeni served on CR staff since 2004. Man, that makes us old, huh? That was a while ago. He became the pastor of Celebrate Recovery in 2012, and alongside Jeni is now leading the worldwide movement. They've been serving in ministry together for over 17 years and are passionate about helping others find the same freedom and healing that they found in their own lives. They've been married since 2000 and have 3 children together. And I think the cool part is again, the healing that we found in our own lives. And that's all of us, right? That's a part of it. So Jeni and Jeni, come up and share with us.
Thanks, Todd. Well, hey, everybody. How's everybody doing? My name is Jeni. I'm a grateful believer. I struggle with alcoholism and codependency. Hey, guys.
Hi, guys. And my name is Jeni, and I'm a grateful believer, and I struggle with codependency, and I'm an adult child of family dysfunction.
Hey.
Hi.
So Jeni and I are going to talk a little bit today about how Celebrate Recovery and mental health can intersect. I think sometimes people think of Celebrate Recovery for certain issues, and that some things kind of qualify and that some things would happen over here. And while I would never say that Celebrate Recovery is the only way to find healing, it's been a powerful part of healing for Jeni and myself, and for thousands of people here at our church and millions of people all around the world. I want to tell you a little bit about what Celebrate Recovery is, before we get too far into it. Celebrate Recovery was actually founded here at our church in 1991 by my parents, John and Cheryl Baker. My dad was a recovering alcoholic who my parents had just gone through a year of being separated, and my dad got sober through AA. And when they reconciled, we invited him to come with us to church, something he hadn't done for years. We had just started attending Saddleback at the time. We were at Tribuca Hills High School, so it wasn't quite what it is today. And he heard Pastor Rick, and he thought, man, I'm home. And then after a few weeks, he realized he couldn't be the only person in the church the size of Saddleback who was dealing with those issues. And so he did the only logical thing. He wrote Pastor Rick a letter, basically outlining this vision of Celebrate Recovery. And the honest to goodness thought, because I was there, was that he would send the letter to Rick. Rick would read it and then find a pastor on staff to do something like Celebrate Recovery. Like that was the goal. And instead, he found himself in Rick's office, and Rick said, great idea, do it. And Celebrate Recovery was born. It's funny that Nicole mentioned, what are you celebrating recovery from? Because I remember when he told me what the name was going to be, I went, that is the smartest thing. And I didn't. I was 14. I was like, I don't get it, right? Like, it doesn't make it. What do you mean celebrate recovery? What's worth celebrating here? And it wasn't until years later that I went through my own process that I realized why the name really is genius, because there is so much to celebrate in Celebrate Recovery. Very quickly, I won't go too deep into this, but at the time, I went through the steps and principles as a codependent, which means I was a son of an alcoholic. I really thought that was my whole issue, that was it. And then years later, after being arrested for DUI, and Jeni and I got married, she got pregnant with our oldest daughter, and I realized that I was about to create that same cycle of dysfunction in our family that I had been raised in. And so I knew I needed to stop. I just didn't know how until somebody reminded me that my parents started this little thing called Celebrate Recovery, and it worked for them and other people, so it might work for me as well. And I began attending Celebrate Recovery, got sober there, and then after a time, I was able to come on staff. And then in February 2 years ago, my dad passed, and very suddenly. And I was then commissioned and ordained to be the new leader of Celebrate Recovery. What Celebrate Recovery is, though, is it's a Christ-centered 12-step ministry. And what that means is that basically we use the 12 steps from AA and the 8 principles that are what Pastor Rick rewrote when he heard about Celebrate Recovery. He saw so much of life change coming out. And so the program was started in 91. In 1993, Pastor Rick had watched what was happening, and then he led our whole church through the Road to Recovery series. Some of you might have even been here for that at the time. And that's where the principles were born. I'm going to read you the principles in a minute just so you can kind of hear what they are and know what they do. But basically, Celebrate Recovery, like I said, it's Christ-centered. So everything we do is based on the foundation of Jesus. If you have traditional, or what we sometimes refer to as secular 12-step experience, you know that the third step says that that there's a God of our own understanding. And when my dad had gotten sober, he realized his higher power had a name, and it was Jesus Christ. And so in Celebrate Recovery, it isn't a God of our understanding, because I don't know about you, but the God of the Bible is bigger than my own understanding. And so for us, the higher power is Jesus, and everything is focused on him. The principles are focused on his words. All of our lessons and the things that we study are focused on the Bible. And the reason that's so powerful is that what we're not looking for is just behavior modification. We're looking for transformation. And so that happens in this process. We use, like I said, the 12 steps and the 8 principles to help us systematically grow and get stronger and find healing from our hurts, hang-ups, and habits. We're going to talk about those in a minute. Let me read you the 8 principles really quickly so you just kind of hear how they go. Number 1, realize I'm not God. I admit that I'm powerless to control my tendency to do the wrong thing and that my life is unmanageable. The beatitude that goes along with this is, happy are those who know they are spiritually poor. Principle 2, earnestly believe that God exists, that I matter to him, and that he has the power to help me recover. Happy are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted, Matthew 5:4. Consciously choose, number 3, to commit all my life and will to Christ's care and control. Happy are the meek, Matthew 5:5. Number 4, openly examine and confess my faults to myself, to God, and to someone I trust. Happy are the pure in heart, Matthew 5:8. Number 5, voluntarily submit to any and all changes God wants to make in my life and humbly ask him to remove my character defects. Happy are those whose greatest desire is to do what God requires. Number 6, evaluate all my relationships, offer forgiveness to those who have hurt me, and make amends for harm I've done to others when possible, except when to do so would harm them or others. Happy are the merciful, Matthew 5:7. Happy are the peacemakers, Matthew 5:9. Principle 7, reserve a daily time with God for self-examination, Bible reading, and prayer in order to know God and his will for my life and to gain the power to follow his will. And number 8, yield myself to God to be used to bring this good news to others, both by my example and by my words. Happy are those who are persecuted because they do what God requires, Matthew 5:10. Now, I read those really quickly, and you're like, I didn't catch all of it. That's okay. We take a lot of time to go through those in Celebrate Recovery. Celebrate Recovery, there are 3 different parts of Celebrate Recovery. If you come on a Friday night, we're in the worship center. We start at 7 o'clock, and you can experience 2 of the doors or 2 of the different things that we do in Celebrate Recovery. The first one's called Large Group. That's where we're going to have worship. We're going to have a testimony like Nicole just did, or a lesson. Actually, this Friday night, I'll be teaching one of the lessons. And it feels the most like a church service. And then after that, we go into our open share groups. Our open share groups are gender specific and recovery issue specific. And we spread out all over the church, and usually in the CMC building and where we're at and all that kind of stuff. But we've got men with men, women with women. We've got all different kinds of recovery groups. One of the biggest myths around Celebrate Recovery is that it's just for drug addicts and alcoholics. And when you hear that word recovery and then you hear the 12 steps, you're like, got it, drug addicts and alcoholics, that's who it's for. It is for us, but only 1/3 of the people who attend Celebrate Recovery come because of an addiction issue. So 2/3 of the people who come do not identify as struggling with addiction. They have codependency issues, or they have anger issues, or they have love and relationship issues, or they have one of our I can't think right now of all the different groups that we have. My favorite group that we have right now, by the way, is called Mixed Issue, because sometimes people come and they go, I don't really know why I need to come. Great, go to Mixed Issue. We used to tell people go to Codependence group because the problem with many of us is that we have other people in our lives. And so
it's them, not us.
and so we would have people go there, but now we have mixed issue groups. And then the third way that we do through Celebrate Recovery is we have something called step studies. Those meet on another night of the week. They're 2-hour meetings where we go through the participant guides. And again, these are gender specific, so men with men, women with women, but they're going to be mixed recovery issue. None of these, by the way, is the most important part of Celebrate Recovery. It's not like if you can only do one, which one you should do. It's important, at least for a while, if you can, to try to get experience with all 3. If you can come on Friday night, all you got to do is come to church. And you don't have to say anything, you don't have to do anything, you don't have to stand up, no one's going to ask you why you're there. I know there's a number of CR folks in the room, and so they could testify to that later on. I won't call them out because we are an anonymous program. And so, but stick around and come to Open Share Group. And even if you don't do that, every Friday night we have something called Newcomers 101. And it'll happen right in the same room. So you come, you hear the lesson or the testimony, you worship, you get to be around it, and then you go to Newcomers 101, and there's a place where you're going to hear a couple more mini testimonies, how we do what we do, and a chance to ask some questions. So that's what Celebrate Recovery is. Why don't you tell us what's next?
Sure. But before I do that, I just wanted to mention, I know Johnny said he read through those principles pretty quickly. If you want to find a place where you can find the 8 principles and the 12 steps, if you go to celebraterecovery.com, under resources, you'll be able to find both the 12 steps and the 8 principles if you want to check that out for yourself. Because like I said, I know you kind of sped through those pretty quickly. So one of the taglines that we use in Celebrate Recovery is we can find freedom from our hurts, hang-ups, and habits. I know, Johnny, you said that just a second ago. And I just wanted to talk a little bit about what we mean by each of those things. Starting with hurts. Hurts, they're pretty self-explanatory, right? We all have hurt in our lives. We've all been hurt by somebody, and we've all hurt other people. That's something that we all have in common no matter who we are. Romans 3:23 tells us that we have all sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. And 1 John 1:18 tells us that if we say we have no sin, that we deceive ourselves and the truth is not in us. So something that we can all agree on off the bat is that we're all imperfect people who've been hurt and have hurt others. And I love that Celebrate Recovery addresses hurt, because this means basically that Celebrate Recovery is a program for anybody and everybody. And I love that. Like Johnny mentioned earlier, that there can be a lot of stigma around the word recovery. And I think a lot of times people hear it, like Johnny said, and they think automatically drugs, alcohol, maybe sexual addiction, or eating disorders. But Celebrate Recovery, it goes beyond so much more than that. It goes beyond even traditional recovery, which tends to focus on sobriety. And sobriety is really important, and it's a very first important step of recovery. But Celebrate Recovery, the program, is about so much more than just sobriety. We go after true healing and freedom, and I love that. So the second word in that tagline is hang-ups. And this gets a little, I think, trickier to define. And I like to think of hang-ups as belief systems, or ways that we believe about ourselves, about others, about the world, or even about God. And these hang-ups, they develop out of the hurt in our lives. So I just wanted to tell you some examples of maybe some belief systems or hang-ups that I know that I have struggled with personally, and other people, I've asked some other people as well. So some of these belief systems can be, I'm a burden, or my emotions make me a burden, or my needs make me a burden. I'm different, or something is wrong with me. To be loved, I need to be perfect. I'm not capable. I can't trust myself. To be safe, I must be invisible or unnoticed by others. I can't trust anyone. I'm responsible for the happiness of others. If I don't help that person, then they're not going to be okay. My emotion makes me irrational. I have to do it myself because no one is going to help me. I'm not worth it, or I am fundamentally unlovable. And these are some of the belief systems that we can get hung up on. These beliefs, they develop, like I said, out of the pain, wounds, or trauma of our past. And these beliefs, these hang-ups, they end up driving our habits, our behaviors. And the habits are the last thing in that tagline. And these are these habits, or more specifically our unhealthy habits, are the outward symptoms of our inward pain. These are the things that people most often think of when they think of recovery. Dr. Diane Langbird says it this way. She says, the wounds of trauma are not visible, but the effects are. And I think you can replace that word, trauma, with pain, hurt, anything. The wounds are not visible, but the effects of those wounds on our life, those become very visible, and those become our habits and our behaviors. And it's interesting because these habits, they're usually what bring people into recovery in the first place. The desire to have them stop. They just want to stop the behavior, and if I stop this, everything will be okay. But just stopping that behavior or that habit isn't always enough. That would be sobriety. And like I said earlier, don't get me wrong, sobriety is important. It is necessary. We need sobriety in our recovery. But we also want beyond sobriety. We want that true freedom and healing from our struggles. And to get that true freedom and healing, we must be willing to look all the way back at our hurts and our hang-ups to understand the why behind our habits. We need to go deep and look for the unseen wounds causing these unhealthy habits. The hurts, they deal with our heart. The hang-ups, they deal with our head and how we think about ourselves in the world, and then our habits deal with our actions. So it starts in our heart, goes to our head, and then comes out in how we act and how we behave. Another way of saying that is our hurts lead to our hang-ups, and our hang-ups lead to our habits. And to get that true healing and freedom, we need to address all three of our hurts, hang-ups, and our habits, not just the habits, which is what we can see. So I started recovery 10 years ago, actually this summer, and I started thinking that it was all about my current behaviors and my struggle with codependency, and that I just needed to stop those behaviors, and then everything was going to be okay. And then as I began to address the pain and the wounds from my childhood, I realized that as I was unpacking that, I was actually beginning to understand my struggle with those codependent behaviors better. I discovered that childhood hurt is most often the root of codependency. And I'll say that again because it was kind of surprising to me when I learned that childhood hurt is most often the root of codependency. These codependent behaviors that I struggled with, such as enabling others, or trying to control or manipulate others, or dismissing my own needs for the needs of other people, these all formed as survival techniques in my childhood. These behaviors, these habits, were necessary for me to feel safe growing up in the dysfunctional home that I grew up in. What began as necessary and needed in my childhood, unfortunately became unhealthy in my adulthood. Brene Brown puts it a little different way. She says it's like putting on armor. These behaviors, these habits, they're like putting on armor. The armor was necessary when we were younger to protect us, but as adults, the armor actually keeps us from being fully seen and fully known by others. The armor no longer serves us, and it actually begins to hurt us. It now keeps us from growing into the gifts that God has given us, and the very thing that once protected us and kept us safe is now keeping us from being the people that God wanted us to be, the people he created us to be. So for me, my recovery of codependency, that looks like becoming aware of my codependent behaviors and aware of what I believe about myself and the world around me, and then realizing that I no longer need those patterns of behavior or those belief systems to make me feel safe or to actually make me safe. Recovery for me looks like laying down that armor and that realizing that what was once helping me is now hurting me. And not just hurting me, but now hurting others in my life as well. So how did I lay down that armor? I went back to my childhood and I addressed the pain and the trauma and the disappointments and the hard stuff. I had to go back and heal and understand why I put that armor on in the first place. To take it off, I had to understand why I put it on. Dr. Anita Phillips, who's a trauma therapist, she says it this way: to get true healing, you have to start with the heart. You have to start with the hurts. Once I addressed those wounds, then I had to become aware of the hang-ups in my life. Like I said, what did I believe about myself because of those hurts? And then I had to replace those old lies about myself with the truth of what God actually says about me, who he says I am. Part of recovery is replacing the old with the new, the unhealthy with the healthy. We want to replace old ways of thinking with God's truth in our life, old unhealthy habits with newer and healthier ways of coping and regulating. My habits that I wanted to stop were directly tied to the pain of my past, and to get freedom from those habits, I needed to address the pain in my life and heal from it. And through both recovery and therapy, I was able to do that. One thing that people ask me all the time is, can therapy and recovery work together? And I say, yes. They work so powerfully together. Victory for me in my recovery with codependency or any of my issues, it doesn't look like perfection. It looks like becoming aware faster if I start to slip into old thought patterns or old behavior patterns, and then choosing a different way, a healthier way. For example, during the pandemic, I was really beginning to worry about my kids' mental health during that. We were all so isolated, and I was beginning to see the effects of that wearing on my kids. And so my old friend codependency started to kick in, and I thought if I could just come up with the right combination of healthy eating, chores, and exercise, then I could fix my kids. And so notice how I said I could fix my kids, not help my kids, because there's a really big difference between fixing somebody and trying to help somebody. I remember so clearly taking a pad of paper and a pencil out that day and sitting down trying to write down that combination of chores and food and exercise. But it was in that moment that the Holy Spirit got my attention by bringing the verse Psalm 46:10 to my mind. Be still, Jeni, and know that I am God. So 2 things that I want to point out here real quick. One is that in that moment I was spiraling because my old habit, my old way of thinking of it's up to you to take care of everybody, or everyone's health is your responsibility, it started kicking in. Those lies were swimming around in my head. Our mental health director for Celebrate Recovery, Sarah Stanton, she says she calls them mind monsters. And at that moment they were really, really loud in my head, feeding off of the fear that I was feeling. The second thing I want to point out is even though those lies were really loud in my head at that moment, the Holy Spirit was still able to cut through the lies and get my attention, and that's when the victory in that particular situation happened. I was able to stop in that moment and ask myself, what am I actually really feeling right now? What am I looking for? What is it I actually need in this moment? And it turns out I was looking for comfort because I was scared. I was scared for my kids. I didn't like to see them hurt. But the comfort that I was after, I can only get it through God, not through the control, which is what I was trying to do in that moment. The Bible verse Psalm 119, 114 reminds me to turn to God when I am overwhelmed and stressed or I feel out of control because he is my ultimate hiding place. The verse says, "You are my hiding place and my shield. I wait for your word." This verse is the perfect replacement for me when my old hang-ups and habits start to kick in, because what I wanted in that moment was comfort for the fear that I felt for my kids and protection for my kids. But that verse tells me that God is my hiding place. That's where I get my comfort. And he's also my shield. He's the protection that's going to cover me and keep me safe. And that end part that says that I wait for your word, it reminds me that I need to choose to wait, stop and wait for God, instead of charging ahead and trying to control the situation, which is my old way of doing things. So do you want to tell a little bit about your journey? And
Yeah, I briefly touched on mine as well, but what I want to talk about with my story in particular is something that we talk a lot about in the intersection of recovery and mental health issues, and that's something called dual diagnosis. As Jenny said, most people, when they come to Celebrate Recovery, they come because they have a habit, usually a bad habit, that they want to stop. And so what they're looking for, what I was looking for, was behavior modification. I want to stop this bad habit. The problem with habits is they work. Even bad habits work. They give us a reward. If a habit isn't rewarded, we don't do it. How many of you have decided on January 1st you're going to start running? You go out to run, you get shin splints. That habit was not rewarded, right? You don't keep doing it. And so, and bad habits, negative habits, they give us a payoff right away, and the pain comes later. Good habits, the pain comes right away and the payoff comes later. So bad habits are easy to repeat, especially when the payoff is doing something for us in a mental health area. So I became somebody who, I became an alcoholic, and it took me years to realize that I was drinking to address some of those core wounds. Some of those things that were closer to the center of what I really needed recovery for. Now, I needed to get sober so that I could do the work of recovery and some therapy, but I also needed to do the work of therapy and recovery before I was sober. So a lot of times people will come to me and they'll say, okay, dual diagnosis, do we deal with the mental health aspect first or the drug and alcohol aspect first? And my answer has become yes. Yes, we just do it, right? Like we need both often. And so for me in particular, I felt for a long time that the cycle of dysfunction that I was trying to break, and this is true, is alcoholism. That I didn't want to pass on a modeled behavior of alcoholism to my kids. My kids are now 19, 17, and 14. So it's a little bit more real than it was when they were like babies, right? When they were little, I could say like they're never going to do bad stuff. They're teenagers now, they do bad stuff all the time. And so, not really, but the reality is, even as a pastor and even with having parents who are the co-executive global directors of whatever, the chances are these kids they're still going to have to make their own decisions as they grow up and they go to college and those things. So the cycle that I really want to break, yes, I hope that they don't drink, but I also hope that if they do, they begin to get help for it earlier. So my dad got help for his alcoholism in his 40s. I got help in my 20s. I saved 15 years between my dad's time and me getting involved in Celebrate Recovery. If my son were to do the same thing, he'd have to start now, right? And so, which would be great. We have the landing for students and stuff like that. Our kids have never wanted to go. We don't force them. But what we want to do is model this for our kids, because Jeni and I are big believers in therapy, both as for marriage counseling and for individuals. I have been medicated for depression for a while. I was just telling Todd a secret. I just stopped my medicine a couple months ago. I know none of you have ever done that. But I called my psychiatrist and got back on. But my drinking, I used to think, was the cause of my problems. It was a symptom of a deeper problem. And so what we do in recovery when we have habits, when we have those things that are causing us pain, because they do cause us pain, and we do need to figure out a way to get sobriety or to get recovery from those things. But if we just stop there, this chance of what we call cross addiction happens. And I wish that meant you became addicted to the cross, like with Jesus, but that's not actually what we mean. What happens is that we'll switch. So we'll notice a lot of times somebody will come into recovery for, let's say, alcoholism, and they get sober, but then they've gained a bunch of weight because they've started eating instead. And they go, okay, I've got to focus on the diet now. And they lose the weight, but now they're starting to spend money on things that they shouldn't spend money on. And so now they're worried about their alcoholism, the weight gain, their finances. They get all that under control, but now they're looking at inappropriate images online. Why is that happening? Because that core hurt hasn't been addressed. That core hurt that changes the way we feel about ourselves and makes us think of ourselves in a certain way with our hang-ups, which then fuels our habits, hasn't been addressed. Often, we need more than just either therapy, support group, or recovery. We often need all three. And I think sometimes people feel bad about that. They think, well, I've seen people get healthy and celebrate recovery, and it's working for me, but I still have this need for my therapist. Me too. Well, now I'm going through this time thing that it feels like it's been even harder as I've been grieving or going through this relationship trauma or whatever it is, and so I need this support group too. Yes. Just like if you went to the doctor and you went and you got your general physician and they did a scan and they said, you should go see a cardiologist because you've got some heart issues. You should go see, somebody to talk about your skin issue or whatever. You might just go, no, you're the one doctor I want. I don't want to go see all these other doctors. No, you'd say, okay, give me the best cardiologist you've got. Give me the best lung doctor. I don't know what they call those. Give me the best whatever you've got. And you'd go get all the different places to get that healing. Jesus is the great physician. So depending on what area he chooses to use to heal you, he gets the glory for that. What I hope you hear from Jeni and I, and from Nicole's testimony earlier, is that if you've been hurt, and the sad reality is you have been, and if you have hurt other people, and the sad reality is you have, you qualify for Celebrate Recovery. Because we talk about hurts, hang-ups, and habits. The best thing that happens for us when we go through recovery is we deal with those hurts. Because if we don't deal with them, getting sober won't matter. If we don't deal with them, healing the relationship won't last. If we don't deal with those core issues, those core pains, those things that happen that make us feel the way we feel and think the way we think. And by the way, this isn't about blaming. This isn't about finding someone as a scapegoat and going, okay, well, you did this. That's kind of like minor league level recovery. It's about explaining. It's not about blaming someone else, but it's about saying, oh, I feel this way about myself because of this message I received. Oh, I interact this way because of this training I received. And when we're able to deal with it, then when it pops up, like Jeni said, hopefully we can deal with it sooner. It's never about being perfect. It's never about having it nailed completely. It's about, oh, I realize I'm starting to act this way because I'm feeling like a burden. Okay, but am I a burden? No, I'm not a burden. So I can tell this person how I feel. In the same way, we talk about this with our habits a lot, about shortening the trigger response. So you may be triggered to act out with your bad habit, and the faster you realize that's what's happening, the faster you can stop yourself from then actually following through with the bad habit. It's the same kind of thing here. Oh, that pain just flared up. And I notice it, and then because of my therapy and what my counselor's been doing, because of my support group and because of my recovery group, I know what to do now that pain is flaring up. And so all of these things work together in concert. And so I would just say, if like me, there's ever been a time where I don't know why it's this way, but for me, those intrusive thoughts happen when it's dark and I'm alone. And it's usually when I lay my head down on the pillow. That's when the enemy likes to attack me. That's when my brain likes to do its thing, right? And in those moments, I need to have some ammunition to speak against those voices that are coming against me. But I remember before I got sober, in those moments, I would drink to fall asleep because I convinced myself I couldn't sleep unless I was drunk. And I would, as the room spun around me, I'd say, God, if you help me stop doing this, I'll never do this again. And in the morning, I'd wake up and go, thanks, God. Wasn't that bad, though. I made it. So I'm just going to kind of keep doing my thing. I would tell Jeni, hey, I think I might be an alcoholic. She'd go, duh. And then I'd say, never mind. I think I'm fine. But if you're like that, if you have something in your life that you just can't seem to stop, and for you, behavior modification, you're like, I hear what you're saying, Johnny, but if I don't stop this thing, my wife's going to leave. If I don't stop this thing, they're going to take my kids. If I don't stop this thing, they're going to whatever. This is going to happen. But you feel like you can't stop? please join us. Because what I want to do is I want to take the shame of that away for you. And I want to say there's something going on that's at play here, and let's work on helping you day by day by day get a little stronger, get a little stronger, get a little stronger, get a little stronger. And then in maybe 30 days from now, you go, oh, I don't really remember that person so well. 60 days from now, you're like, I used to struggle with that. 100 days from now, you're like, I feel so free. 360 days from now, you're telling other people, like, this is what God has done for me in this issue that I couldn't stop doing. And so that's what recovery can do.
Can I say something real fast?
Please do.
So on that, because you're talking about if you have a habit that you're aware of, that you
Right.
need to stop.
Good.
I just want to encourage you that even if you don't have a habit, but you're like, can this program work for me? Yes. Like Nicole had in her testimony when she told her daughter, and she's like, I'm going to Celebrate Recovery. And her daughter says, well, what are you going to celebrate recovery from? And she's like, I don't know, but I'm going to find out. That was a little bit of my story. Like I identify as a codependent now, but when I got into recovery, I didn't know that I struggled with codependency.
Who did know before?
Well, somebody told me that I struggled with codependency for years.
The reason I bring
which
that
is-
up is not to brag. Don't do that. Don't, if you
Well,
know that somebody is struggling,
I pushed against it, and I was like, "You probably kept me from recovery for
Yeah,
years
probably for
because
years.
of it." No, that's
so
blaming.
It's my fault. I see how it is. You're going
I
on
just
my
want to
inventory.
say
Dear
that I got
diary.
into recovery.
Jeni.
Hush. I got into recovery just simply knowing that I had a lot of pain in my life that I didn't know how to process through. I didn't know what to do. We have a big conference coming up next month, and I would attend all these years, but as your wife. And I would stand by and I'd watch all these people praise God in a way that I'm like, they have something that I don't have. They have a freedom in their life that I don't have. They have a healing from the pain in their life that I don't have, and I want it so bad. And it was that desire to want that freedom and healing, that's what got me into sober recovery in the first place. Not because I had a habit that I was aware of. I became aware of habits. I got into recovery, and through that I did become aware of my behaviors and my habits that I have worked on stopping, and I'm grateful for that. But I just wanted to put that encouragement out there as well.
Yeah, so why don't we talk a little bit about how CR can help?
Well, we're going to bring Nicole up,
Okay,
and
well,
she's.
why don't you bring Nicole?
Well, yes, Nicole, you want to come on up and tell us a little bit about? So, do you start by introducing like what we do with
so
mental
what
health?
we did a number of years ago is we realized that because we both struggle with mental health issues, and so do members of our family and other people around us, that Celebrate Recovery needed a focus on mental health issues. And actually, Pastor John started this as an initiative of Celebrate Recovery to let people know that have mental health issues, which by the way is all of us, right? That Celebrate Recovery can be a part of that. And so what we do is we have mental health champions at CRs, and Nicole is our mental health champion here at Celebrate Recovery at Lake Forest at Saddleback. So she's going to come up and tell you just a little bit about what a mental health champion does. Correct?
Yep.
Yeah.
Do you want to sit here? Here, sit down. I'm good.
As a mental health champion, I work directly with our ministry leaders. So I work with Charlie and with Megan. Charlie's here today. And I help to gather mental health resources that we share with our Celebrate Recovery. Last month was Mental Health Awareness Month, so we ordered bracelets and pins and stickers and green candies just to kind of bring awareness to mental health awareness. We just try to, as a mental health advocate, we're just trying to break the stigma around mental health, and I have a sign at our resource table, just goes over, but I'll just kind of talk about just briefly some of those, and then I also want to introduce you to our mental health awareness card. So for the mental health ministry, it's a safe and loving place for those seeking to find support in the midst of mental health issues and dual diagnosis. Willing to support mental health through Christ-centered accountability and sponsorship, in a safe place to work through all of life's hurts, hang-ups, and habits, believing that freedom in Christ is something that can be complete even without physical healing. And what we are not a replacement for counseling or therapy, which is what Johnny and Jeni have talked about, a place for judgment, and we are not a place that gives up on hope. And then one of the resources that we have, and I have them in the back at the back table. They're in English and Spanish. We have it in Mandarin with the help of a couple of my step study sisters to help me translate it in Mandarin, and my sponsor is helping me get it translated in Korean, so we'll have that soon too. One of the things that we use the traffic light or the stoplight to be able to to check out our mental health, because I know for me, sometimes I have a hard time coming up with a word of how I'm feeling, but I can come up with that color. And green just means that we're all good, we're stable, or we're feeling hopeful. Yellow, when we're in that yellow zone, we're starting to feel sad, no pleasure, and normal or increased irritability, anger, having triggers, or no energy. And then that red zone, this is when we're in crisis. We're feeling overwhelmed by feelings, hopelessness, not eating or sleeping. And so what we like to do is on the back of the card, we come up with a plan. So we start to write down what we would do. Typically, you would want to write those down when you're in green, when your mind is clear and you can actually think, because when you're in that yellow or red stage, you're just not able to think clearly as to like how you would want to get out of that crisis stage. So one of the things, yellow is the best time to call your sponsor or your accountability partner. We have a mental health agreement, and I have copies at our table as well that we partner and we share that with anyone that we feel safe with, typically your sponsor or your accountability partner. And then you think about what has worked in the past so that you can just quickly go back to those of what may have worked in the past. And then when you're in the red, that's the time to call 988 or 911 to contact the suicide prevention line. The main thing is that we try to stress is that God created us to work in community, and so we want to make sure that we are reaching out to our community to make sure that we know that we are not alone.
Thank you. You can take that. I'm good with that. I don't need to put. Thank you, Nicole.
That's cool. One of the key things about the difference between Celebrate Recovery and therapy is that we're not licensed therapists. Like Nicole said, we're not people who can diagnose. We're not there to. We don't actually even give advice. We have a rule that we're not allowed to fix. And so when you come to Celebrate Recovery and you get into one of our groups, we've got 5 guidelines, and the guidelines are things like you get 3 to 5 minutes to share, and then there's no crosstalk and there's no fixing. And so what's great is you can say whatever you want for 3 to 5 minutes, and when you're done, we're going to go, thanks for sharing. What's hard about that, though, is you might say something like, I really need some help. Can somebody just tell me what to do? And we're going to go, thanks for sharing, right? And so because we're not therapists, we're not people who are better. Like, we're still people who are on the road to recovery with you. And so it's important that you have that place where you can say whatever it is you need to say, like we do in recovery. But then, like for me, when I go see my therapist, if I don't get some homework, I feel kind of gypped that week, right? I feel like, wait a second, I'm supposed to leave here with some things to do. And so it's important that we have both of those things. So how can Celebrate Recovery help?
Okay, so how can Celebrate Recovery help someone who is struggling with a mental health issue? So we at Celebrate Recovery, we strive to create a safe environment where everybody feels welcome, where everybody feels seen and heard and loved and known that we want you there. So we try to really put out a welcome mat for everybody. Celebrate Recovery can be an additional resource, another tool in the participants' tool belt. So we've talked a little bit about that. Dr. Anita Phillips, again, has this really great saying. If you follow her, she has T-shirts that says it, prayer is a weapon, therapy is a strategy. And she said that when we're in a battle for our health or for our recovery, for healing, we need both weapons and strategies. We need both. And so you can put Celebrate Recovery as another strategy in your battle, in your tool belt, to battle for your health and your healing and your freedom. Do you want to say anything else about that? Okay. So we have mental health champions like Nicole that she just got up and talked about, who advocate for and help create and maintain a safe place at Celebrate Recovery. We strive to be a ministry within the church that helps to undo judgment and help destigmatize struggling with a mental health issue. We try to keep, those harmful sayings that can be prayed away, or you just don't have enough faith. We don't want any of that at Celebrate Recovery. We want to be a safe place. Do you want to say anything about that? Just jump in anytime you want to say anything.
You're doing great. I will tell you if I do.
Okay, great. So Celebrate Recovery has open share groups, which we've talked about, which is that second door on a Friday night if you come. We have testimonies. People share every other week a testimony of what God has done in their life. We have step studies, inventories, where people can hear stories like their own and find hope. I love that it's called Hope for Mental Health. I know I keep going back to her, but she's so smart. Dr. Anita Phillips also says that faith says it can happen, but hope says it can happen for me. And so when we give our testimony, hopefully we're giving hope to other people that God can do it for them as well.
I will say something about that. I think one of the strongest things for me about Celebrate Recovery is realize that I'm not alone. As a man specifically, I can't speak to what women feel, but I know a lot of men, we feel alone in our issues, and I think we're getting there with the ability to talk about how we feel and to admit it, but it can be hard, even for somebody who does this professionally, to tell people how I'm feeling. And what I love about being in recovery circles is even if somebody in that circle doesn't say the exact thing I was feeling, when they say something I can relate to, man, I just go, oh, okay, it's not just me. It's not just me who feels that way. And there's something about feeling seen in our issues. That's why it's really important, by the way, that if you come to Celebrate Recovery, you bring your real self there, that you don't try to pretend that you have it all together, because that won't, this is a weird way to say it, but that won't impress us, right? We're gonna be like, okay, we're here when you're ready. But just the idea that bring all of your stuff, because the beautiful thing is that as you go through this, your victory, and you will experience victory, will inspire somebody else who's there for the first time feeling like you did on your first time.
I love that. So Sarah Stanton, our mental health director, was talking about this last year at the summit, our conference, and she said, what can victory look like? It can look like increased peace. It can look like a consistent routine, whether that's coming to Celebrate Recovery, a consistent med routine, or a consistent therapy routine. Utilizing those strategies, it can involve, like we've talked about, you get a strong support, you get accountability. We've talked a lot about sponsors. Do you want to mention sponsors real fast?
Yeah, so sponsors are people who are ahead of us in the program, and so they've been in Celebrate Recovery longer. We always recommend that men with men, women with women, and everything that we do, and that for us, we don't dictate. If you come on Friday night, we're not going to tell you who your sponsor is. It'll be up to you when it's time to find that person. But we always suggest they're a Christian, that they understand your relationship with Jesus. And in one of these areas, if you have a mental health struggle, having somebody who identifies with that, or at least understands it, that won't go, why do you feel that way, right? How helpful is that when you're depressed and somebody goes, stop. But somebody who can understand that and apply that to their own recovery. And then we have what we call accountability partners. So if you think about your sponsors kind of like your coach, and the accountability partners, the other people on your team kind of going along with you at the same time. And it's just to have support in your life so you don't have to go through things on your own.
Yeah, so ultimately, Celebrate Recovery, we want to normalize and validate mental health struggles, and provide a safe place for everybody can come together and fight for victory and stability and health and healing in their life.
Yeah. So what we have now is we've got some discussion questions around your table.
All right, let's pull back in here. This is where I do another prayer, or there we go. I just say the word pray, it works. All right. Well, we're going to do our question and answer time. So I did get these cards. If any other cards weren't collected, just put them up, and they'll bring them up to me here, and we can go from there. Well, thanks, guys, for all this. It was awesome.
Thanks.
It's awesome to be up here with you. It's kind of fun.
Yeah.
Well, hey, let me ask you a question about dual diagnosis. Obviously, because dual diagnosis is one of the things that we work with. How big of a role do you think, let's say, does mental health play in addictions? So when you come to addictive pieces.
Yeah, I think what we're learning is that it plays a bigger role than we thought. I think the the worldview of addiction is that's weakness, right? And that's a like a internal weakness, or there's something wrong with the person who's addicted. And I think what we've learned is that mental health issues can drive so much of that. And for so many of us, what we're trying to do is cover up that thing. Where Jeni talked about earlier about looking for comfort during the pandemic. That's what I did with alcohol. I wanted comfort, and I wanted the stuff in my life to kind of be toned down a little bit. As somebody who struggles with depression, I wanted something to make me feel better. And so I think what ends up happening a lot is the world looks at addicts and they go, oh, weak. And what we do is we look at addicts and we go, oh, you're hurt. Mm-hmm. And so we want to try to help address that part. So I think it's a bigger role than we thought it was, for sure.
Yeah, that makes sense, because we hear all the time about self-medicating.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And in a way, that's kind of what happens is folks self-medicate.
I mean, all the research that they're doing with social media right now, right? Getting a like on an Instagram post has a little dopamine spike, and that dopamine feels good. And so what do? We put a thing out and we keep checking to see how many likes we get, and we up the ante. That's in some way, for those of us who, like me, it's been Twitter lately, but it's been TikTok or Instagram or whatever in the past, Facebook, for that need to scroll is in some, I'm not going to look at anybody because I don't want anybody to get mad at me, but that's, in some ways, that's an addiction, right? And what's happening is that there is a comfort loop that's happening. Mm-hmm. I see somebody post something politically that aligns with what I feel, it makes me feel good, and so a little dopamine hits. I need more and more and more of that. And so in the same way where that can feel good, it's the same thing with the other things that we do: spending money, eating too much, not enough, drugs, alcohol, sex, whatever those things are.
It's interesting how much of this all comes back to our brain, mm-hmm. right? And what our brain sort of, if we don't know what the issues are that are driving that, there could be a physiological issue as mm-hmm. well as a psychological issue.
Right.
And it ends up being pretty complex.
Yeah. That
makes sense. So I think we covered that one. How do you work with a person who comes to CR, let's say for an addiction issue or whatever it is that what their hurt, habit, or hang up is, but they haven't worked on the mental health issue itself? Like maybe they have a more severe mental health issue, let's say.
What we're not going to do is we're not going to diagnose that person, right? So we're not going to go, hey, you can't come until you start taking, you know what I mean? Like if we have somebody who, I mentioned earlier, we have our 5 small group guidelines. So if somebody has a mental health issue that makes it hard for them to not, to be quiet or to sit still, to be able to kind of be a good citizen of a group, we'll often pair them with somebody. And that's where, like, Nicole is a mental health champion, and her group would come in where they would kind of try to help that person to say, hey, here's what we're doing, and that kind of thing. And then if somebody self-identifies is usually when we're going to get involved, as we're just going to, we're not going to tell that person they can't come, but we are going to ask them to follow the guidelines and things. And if they can't, then Megan or Charlie or one of us will have some sit-down conversations with them to kind of figure some things out. I know we've even gotten like you and Liz involved in the past to kind of like help us out with this so that we know what we're doing and we can love this person well. And then what our mental health champions will do is we have sometimes like a covenant where it says like, this is what we're going to do together. Where I'm
agreement.
Yeah.
Nicole has a copy of it in the back table if you're curious about what that says.
Yeah. There's there's a mental health agreement back there, which is really, really great. I got a copy of it before I came.
Yeah, and so the person needs to self-identify for that, and they need to give you permission. You're basically asking for permission. Can I ask you if you're taking your meds, and can I ask you if you're going to your therapy and things like that? And once they sign it, then we will, and we'll say, hey, you asked me to be a part of this, and it's just accountability.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's great. You both have talked about the fact that, Celebrate Recovery was so helpful, plus therapy. Mm-hmm. You even talked about support groups and things like that. Kind of in your own experience, what do each of those bring? Like, what's the uniqueness? Because sometimes people want to go to one thing and have it all taken care of.
Yeah.
Well, it's funny. I think I just realized this about myself. I've been doing therapy since my early 20s. I was diagnosed with panic disorder back when I was in my early 20s. Panic attacks just started hitting out of nowhere when I was in my late teens, and I just did not know what was going on. And so I started therapy, got on medication for it, and that's been, I've been in and out of therapy since my 20s and on and off medication also since my 20s. But when I got into recovery, I realized now 10 years into recovery, that when I went to therapy in the beginning, we say that, I hear it a lot, like people are white knuckling trying not to drink, or they're white knuckling trying to do something with abstaining from an addiction. I describe my early 20s and 30s as white knuckling my way to trying to be healthy. I wanted to, even though I was hurting, I was so hurting, I like white knuckle my way, like I can prove to people that I'm healthy and I'm responsible. And so when I went to therapy at that time, I went and I gave a fake version of myself to the therapist. I wasn't honest about how I was feeling. I wasn't honest with my struggles. I brought this fake version of myself that I wanted to be validated that I was healthy, right? So I went in and I pretended and I tried to charm the therapist, and I wasn't doing it intentionally. I just didn't realize that's what I was doing. And then I got into recovery, and we do this thing called a 4-step where we talk through your hurts, hangups, and habits. How were you hurt? How did it make you feel? What did you believe about yourself? And then what were the habits that developed out of that? So when I got back into therapy after this, I was able to take my whole real self into therapy for the very, very first time. Celebrate Recovery gave me a place where a safe place to practice being vulnerable, where I wasn't getting any feedback, or I wasn't told I shouldn't feel this way. A lot of us, when we're younger, we're told, you shouldn't feel that way. You're not allowed to feel that way. We're not allowed to talk about it. Suppress, deny. Celebrate Recovery gave me a place where I could practice being honest and vulnerable, and I was able to take that practice into therapy with me and bring my whole real self. And so that's a little bit about how they worked really, really well for me, and they work powerfully together. And I take things that I learn in recovery and I take those into therapy with me. And I take things I learn in therapy and I bring that into recovery with me. They work so well together.
Yeah, and I think, like, for me, one of the strengths of therapy is that's an hour just about me, right? That's me talking most of the time. My therapist is going to interject. They're going to challenge me on things and help push against some of those things or whatever. The trick about being in a Celebrate Recovery group, if you're in an open share group on Friday night, like I said, it's an hour long, and you're going to have 3 to 5 minutes where you're the one talking. The rest of the time you're listening. And a lot of people put a lot of focus on the sharing part, which obviously, right, they're saying things they've never said before. By the way, my favorite thing is whether it's in a counseling session, one-on-one over coffee with a friend, or in a group, when somebody leans forward and they go, I've never told anybody this before, I get really excited. I know the thing they're going to say is going to be really painful, but I also know that's the beginning of healing for that person in many ways. And so in a step study or an open share group, I'm only talking for a few minutes. The rest of the time I'm listening. And when recovery kind of levels up is when you don't just focus on the 3 minutes you're talking, but you're also focused on the 3 minutes that every other individual in the group is talking, and you're listening to them, and you're hearing nuggets of truth, or you're hearing somebody who's, you've been in recovery for 6 years and this person's been in for 6 days, and you're hearing the struggle of those early days again, and you're hearing somebody say something that you go, oh my gosh, that's brilliant. And so where therapy, if it's the two of us in marriage counseling, it's just about the two of us and our kids and family and stuff like that. It's not about anybody else in that room. If our therapist was like, let me tell you about our marriage, I'm like, no, that's not why I'm here, But in the group setting, even though Jeni and I can't be in a recovery group together, which also there's some strength in there. And so they work so well together.
Yeah, because it's interesting, because in your story, Jeni, you went to therapy first, then to recovery.
Oh, yeah.
And you went to recovery first, and then to therapy.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
That's really from your experience going to recovery first and then therapy. What was the missing element for you?
Well, I'll tell you what's been interesting is, like a lot of addicts, I say that, and maybe this isn't like a lot of addicts, but it makes me feel better to think it is. I focused on, in recovery, all the things that I had done to everyone around me, and very little to the things that were done to me. Mm-hmm. So my 4th step, where we write down all of our hurts, hangups, and have all the things that done to us, all the things that we've done, was very little anybody had ever hurt me. It was all how my actions had hurt other people. And I was fine with that. And that was the case for years. And it took me a while to realize, I've actually been hurt too. It isn't just that I'm this big bad alcoholic who hurt everybody in my path. Now, my alcoholism did hurt people, and I needed to be aware of that, and I needed to deal with that. I needed to make the amends and do those things. But I was also hurt by people as well. And so I think therapy helped me with that, where I would kind of come in and I'd just be like, no, I'm the bad guy. It's me. Mm-hmm. And the therapist could kind of help, like, well, what do you know what I mean? And kind of challenge some of those thoughts.
Well, and I think I know So when you get down to those hurts, like you did, right? Some of them are deep, deep hurts. Some of them are traumas. And if it's trauma that we're talking about and deep, deep hurt, that we need help, right? So like sometimes we fall and we skin our knee and it just scrapes and it's like, that's okay. That's just kind of a flesh wound. It will heal on its own. We'll put a Band-Aid on it. Sometimes we put some ice on it, we rest it and it heals. Sometimes we fall and it gashes so deep, you're like, I need to go to a doctor to see if it's broken on the inside or if there's if it needs stitches. Like some wounds and traumas need professional help. And Celebrate Recovery, we're not professional help, right? So we can help. What they can do is they can work together, get you to the wound, get you to help acknowledge this is how I was hurt, and then you take that hurt and you carry it to the therapy office. You go to the psychiatrist, you go to the psychologist, and you go, I need help here. And then they work together in the healing process.
I will say one thing that's happened for me in therapy is I've had different therapists say like, well, you're very self-aware. And I think that is because of the work I've done in recovery, where it's sort of like we can fast forward through some of the first stuff. And if you have a lot of therapy, you can bring that same self-awareness to recovery. And I think that's why they do work so well together.
Yeah, and I agree because, the self-awareness part is so huge in our growth and in our recovery and in our help, right? Because if I'm not self-aware, then I'm going to react to life. Right, my emotions are just going to control my react to life. But if I'm self-aware, I can choose how to respond to life, and that's all the difference.
And even if you can't choose it right away,
eventually
you can go, wait a second, I reacted.
Yep.
Oh no, I went real quick into this. I jumped through these stages, right? And like my training kicked in or the trauma kicked in. And I think what's great about that is, the more of this you have, you can go. I was sharing with you about a time I did something with one of my kids, and I realized, oh man, I just am doing this pattern. And I looked at her, and I was very quickly able to say sorry and be able to move forward from that. But that thing kicked in. And so I think what's great about the self-awareness piece is, and I think what's great too is when we have the Holy Spirit with us, he's such a gentle convictor and such a gentle guide where he can go like, hey, Johnny, you're doing it again. Hey, buddy, be nice to your kid. Whatever the thing is, or I don't think Jenny meant that when you got so mad, like that kind of thing. And I just think that there's stuff that, it's just such there's such kindness in the way that the Spirit guides us. Absolutely. And I think sometimes it can be really challenging because self-awareness can hurt. And it can feel like, oh my gosh, here's just another part of me that's broken. Here's just another part of me that's messed up. And I think the self-awareness part is, but I'm still loved by God. I'm still chosen by God. I still was designed by God. I still have great life ahead of me and all of those things. So I don't know. I just think
that's exactly right.
Because self-awareness isn't just, here's all the stuff I'm bad at. So,
right.
Yeah. Absolutely right.
Yeah, it's both sides of it. Well, and that's the beauty of what we get to do here at Saddleback. Sometimes people think, well, I just go to CR or I just go to we have church counseling. We've got referrals. I mean, we've got the whole thing. And based on who you are, that we have different processes, programs, and things to help you almost customize what you need.
Well, you and I have worked so much together in the past where we're like, hey, that you need counseling. Like John, he'll say to me, you need counseling. No, but I'm just like, we've worked well. We've worked well between CR and care to be able to say like, let's provide a holistic way for people to get healing in Saddleback where there isn't like, I've never been like, why'd you tell that person to go to support group? CR's not enough. You know what I mean? Right. It's like, no, we want that completely.
That's exactly right. That's good stuff. Well, here's some questions from the audience too. Would you say that Celebrate Recovery is a program or is it a fellowship?
That's great. I think it's both. I think, what I love about Celebrate Recovery in a lot of ways is that it is a discipleship program in disguise. Really what it is, it's about growing closer to Jesus. And the process of, as Hebrews says, of stripping off those things that slow us down and the sin that easily entangles us so that we can run with perseverance the race set up for us. What CR does is it gives us a systematic way to do those things, which is actually just growing closer to Jesus. It's stripping away those things that are false idols and false gods in our lives, those sacred cows and those golden calves that we put in our lives, and getting away from those, getting closer to Jesus. So there is a program, but we don't do it in isolation. We do it with fellowship, and we do it with each other, and we're stronger the more people we have around us. I was just talking to somebody during the break about the difference between accountability partners and sponsors. I love my sponsor, but it's one guy. My accountability partners, of which you're one, are people who are many people, and some of them know they're my accountability partners. Some people just think they're my friends, right? And so I have a lot more people who I can go to when I'm struggling. And so the fellowship, it's hard to separate those things.
Yeah, they work together. They're not mutually exclusive. We work the principles, we work the steps in order, but we work that together in a community, in a fellowship of other people who are.
And in fact, you can't do the program in isolation, because the first 3 steps you can come out of, you can admit that you have a problem. You can hope that there's somebody bigger than you, and you can come to Jesus. You technically can do those on your own. But once you get to principle or step 4, there's too many one another's in there. So you have to share your faults with God, yourself, and someone you trust. You can't do that on your own, and so the program really is dependent on other people in a lot of ways.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I think there was a second part to the question too, is how can someone with maybe a mental health issue or mental illness use Celebrate Recovery to help them?
Yeah, I would just say by one way to do it is to say, and in fact, I've started every once in a while identifying as somebody who struggles with alcoholism and depression. And so for me, if I was starting CR today and I wanted to work on my depression, I would go to the mixed issue group, and I would say that the area that I'm struggling with is depression. I would hazard against some of these things though, because this is why the definition between sobriety and recovery is so important. Sobriety is not the end result for things like anxiety, depression, or mental health issues. Recovery is. And so I would hate to go, man, I relapsed in depression today because my brain chemicals were messed up, right? Like I didn't, I know very clearly as an alcoholic what a relapse looks like. If I don't drink today, I didn't relapse, right? As a codependent, with kids and a wife and as a pastor, like I probably don't have an hour of codependency sobriety, right? And so the idea being there that like there are some issues that when you come to Celebrate Recovery, it's kind of up to us to say, right, I'm not looking for sobriety from depression. I'm not looking to not have depression. I'm looking for those tools to handle it when it happens. Of course, I believe that God is big enough that he can take that away and that depression can be lifted. So I'm not saying that, hey, just be fatalistic and be doomed by it. But it's tempting to think, oh, they found sobriety from their issue. I can find sobriety from my issue. And because we know that our like you said, it comes back to our brain chemistry so much, man, you can't control that. You can be on meds, all that kind of stuff. How many of us could talk about a time where a med stopped working?
Well, that's
right?
Why Sarah said that what can victory look like if you come to Celebrate Recovery with a mental health struggle? It can look like increased peace. It can look like a consistent routine. It can look like a strong support community, a safe, strong support community where you can come and be honest about how you're feeling, honest about your struggles, honest about the fact that maybe you're not feeling good today, you're not feeling good tomorrow, you can come every single time and be honest about where you are. I know that with a mental health struggle, it can be so isolating and it can feel so lonely. I'm alone. No one's going to understand how I'm feeling. And the way we can fight against that is to get into a community of people that are a safe support for us, who are sometimes they're going to say, yeah, me too. Sometimes that, yeah, me too, is so powerful, right? Like I understand. I know that when I first started struggling with panic attacks, I heard a friend of mine was also struggling with panic attacks and was ahead of me in that journey, and I globbed onto her because it was like, you know how I feel. You know how I feel. There's so much power in that, of not being isolated and alone.
Yeah, that's so true. And I think too, sometimes the healing is the medication.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Right? And sometimes that's the case too, right?
Yeah.
And so it's just like you guys said, it's just complex with all the pieces. If someone is going through CR and needs maybe some psychological help, right? Like something comes up, how do you handle that? Do you do referrals?
Yeah, so what we would do is we would point them to the same list that we use for the church counselors, to get therapy here or help with the church counseling that's available here first and foremost. And then if that, sometimes they need to find an outside provider, but we would point them. We would just say, hey, let's get you in the queue here and get you in counseling here and that kind of stuff. So
Yeah, that's absolutely right. So if someone's in that spot, we work in tandem as a team to help anybody in determining kind of what the best help is and what the next steps are. So between the care department and what we have in CR, we work together for that. So
yeah, it's a beautiful orchestration when it happens well. When somebody can come and we really can meet them in different places.
Yep. And I think you said this earlier about trauma. Is there any focus on trauma-informed recovery with an awareness of trauma responses?
So this is a place that we actually talk about this a lot, because none of us, we're not trained trauma therapists. And so it's really, you want to be very careful when saying it's trauma informed, because I think that this actually, I'm taking something that you've told me but I'm pretending like it was my idea.
Perfect.
That people can hear that and they can think that you're providing a certain amount of expertise, where when I say trauma informed, to me, in some ways, that's going back to what we were talking about the hurts are so foundational to everything else. But I think that for many people that can mean something different. And so while we definitely understand the role of trauma in recovery, do you want to speak to that a little bit? Do you know what I'm...
No, I
Okay.
finished that sentence.
Just that we're careful about saying it's trauma informed, because we're not trained in that area.
Yeah. I think that I think the world of science is catching up. Like, recovery has been around, traditional recovery has been around for a really, really long time. And I think it's catching up to science and understanding trauma and understanding, adverse childhood experiences, ACEs, and how science is showing, these studies are showing more and more and more that our childhood experiences, the hurt, the pain, the hardships, the wounds, they all have a very direct effect to how we affect our adult lives, our choices that we make. And so I think that we are in the process of learning that ourselves. Celebrate Recovery is in the process of learning that right now. I referenced Dr. Anita Phillips quite a bit. She's a trauma therapist specifically, and she's working with the Celebrate Recovery. She's teaching us, but she's the one who very much cautioned us, like, please do not make promises that you are not able to fulfill. Like, this is not a place where you can, it's a place where you can be open and honest about your traumas and talk about them, but also aware that traumas need some therapy to help in that healing process as well.
Like, I'm a big fan of EMDR. We're not going to do that at Celebrate Recovery, right?
Yeah.
And so, like, there are, again, there's different places where those tools work.
Yeah, and maybe a better word for now is trauma sensitive.
Yes. Yeah.
Oh, that's
Yeah.
a great, I love that.
I like that too.
As opposed to informed, which could be the whole program.
I mean, we do have, with Johnny's talked about these guidelines. We have these 5 small group guidelines that we use in our open share groups and in our step studies. And the last one is offensive language is not,
Offensive language has no place.
It has no place in a Christ-centered recovery
Includes
group.
graphic descriptions.
And so if people hear that and think, oh, so no swearing. Okay, yeah, we do mean no swearing, but also we mean graphic descriptions. Be aware of the fact that people do have traumas or you can be triggering with your language. And so that would be a trauma sensitive thing, is just being aware that how much of our share of our story we share, or how we decide to share it in a setting, can be triggering to other people.
And I'll even say there was a time where I was talking about cutting on stage at the summit, and I made a hand gesture when I referenced it, and a woman came to me and she said, that was really traumatizing to me when you made the gesture. She's like, I know what you're, and I didn't think about it until she pointed it out to me. But that was one of those things where that would, if we were in a group, that would have included a graphic description, right? Because I made a motion. I'm trying really hard not to do it right now. That felt graphic to the person who saw it, And so when we talk about those things, there's this weird thing that happens when we start talking about our issues. It feels so good that now I just want to talk about it all the time, and you realize not everybody is ready for it, right? And so there's times where you kind of have to, and so if somebody was kind of sharing something graphically about how they're feeling, we may need to intervene there. Yeah.
That makes sense. So can you tell us about CR groups for teens? So if someone has a daughter who's 18, would she be in with the younger age group or the older age group?
So 18 and out of high school, just be with us on Friday nights. 18 in high school, we have what we call The Landing. So Landing is our program for teens. It's the age range is kind of big. It's junior high to high school. And by the way, now because of the way JHM is, that means 6th grade to senior. And I realize that's a large spread, but we have great leaders who are
Highly trained.
who run the landing, who make it very safe. It's funny because our middle daughter is going to be a senior this year, and she's 17, and right now she would go to the landing. In just a few months it'd be like, okay, come on in here. What's changed? Well, she's not in high school anymore, right? And so there are things that that we're going to say in CR that young kids don't need to hear yet. And by the way, also there may be a few people who need to watch out where they're at with children. And so so if you have a teenager who is in high school, then the landing is a perfect place. And basically, we used to call that pre-covery. It's not. It's recovery. The kids who are in the landing are going through real issues. And by the way, we also have for kids from like kindergarten to 5th grade, we have Celebration Place. And so the cool thing about that is you come on a Friday night, you can take your children to Celebration Place, your students to the landing, and then you can go to Celebrate Recovery, and we're going to be doing the same lesson. So we're going to be talking about denial in all 3 places. And what's cool about that, not this week, that's just the first lesson that we do. What's cool about that is that parents, teenagers, and kids can all get an age-specific kind of lesson on that, and then our hope is that begins to affect the entire family.
Yeah, that's great. And you have common language to talk about things.
Yeah. One of my favorite stories before Jeni was in recovery, we were home one night. She's like, what's up with you? And I was just like, I don't know, I'm just in my head. And she goes, I hate it when you say that. And I go, why? And she goes, because I don't know what you mean. I don't know what you don't have to leave.
I'm offended. I don't want to hear it.
And
she's got to get water.
Yeah,
I know.
And so this is for the rebuttal. And then years later, she was in her first step study, and I was like, "How you doing?" She goes, "I don't know, I'm just in my head." And I was like, "Yes!" And she's like, "That's a weird response to what I just said." I said, "No, but we're speaking this like you know what I mean now, right?" And so the fact that we're both in recovery and we've done so much therapy together and separately, like it does really help to have a common language for things, so that when I say something, she knows exactly, oh, that means this. It doesn't mean something over here. So it's nice to have. And what's cool about the landing Celebration Place and Celebrate Recovery is that can happen for the whole family.
Yeah, that's awesome. That is great. Someone asked a question, so it sounds like we got a little recruiting here. How can you become a mental health champion at CR?
Go talk to Nicole in the back, and she will talk to you all through it.
Yep.
Talk to Nicole.
Easy. That's an easy answer.
Yeah.
Nicole's going to have a visitor, maybe. We'll see.
Yeah.
Does a sponsor need to be active in Celebrate Recovery?
Oh, that's
a great question.
Great question.
I would say they don't need to be active in Celebrate Recovery, but they should be active in recovery. So my sponsor, his sponsor, has never come to Celebrate Recovery. He goes to AA, and that's where they met. I would certainly not tell my sponsor that his sponsor doesn't count, right? And so, unless I didn't want him to be my sponsor anymore. And so they need to be active in recovery. And again, this is like me saying what I think. It's up to you. It's up to everybody to find his or her own
there's
sponsor.
like an ideal and then
Right.
there's reality, right? I think that I think an important component of a sponsor is that they understand recovery and that they're ahead of you in the journey. But I think one of the most important things about finding a sponsor is it's somebody that you trust.
Yeah.
They say sometimes it's somebody that you go, I like that. I see the recovery in your life. Help me along in that
I think what you
process,
don't want is somebody who's what we would call a one-stepper. And so a one-stepper is somebody who feels like all you need is Jesus, and then the rest of the steps you don't really need. And the reason for that is, like I said, again, the steps are just a systematic thing. There's nothing magical about them. But somebody who's just like, just stop. Just ask God to help you stop. Like you haven't thought of that already, right? And so somebody, I think that's the thing, that if somebody doesn't understand the steps and principles or why you need them, that might not be a great fit for a sponsor. But
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. That works too for mental health, right?
Yeah.
Just stop. Doesn't work so hard.
No.
I love when people just stop being anxious.
Yeah, just
oh,
stop
cool.
it. Yeah.
Thanks, man.
Yeah.
I haven't thought of that.
Just knock it off. That'd be great. It'd be really easy. We could all be better right now. So on the sponsor thing, what's required if someone wants to be an accountability partner or a sponsor?
So again, the requirements is kind of a funny way to, accountability partner, you're just there, right? You're along the ride with, and so like the easiest requirement is just telling people that you're available. So if you're in a group and you say, hey, I'm looking for people to chat with and help keep me accountable, I think the key is that you're not looking just to hold other people accountable, but you're looking for that accountability first and foremost for you, right? Like, I need people to hold me accountable. And then if I also get to hold other people accountable, great. But if I'm just looking to be like, hey, Todd, I want to hold you accountable, you probably aren't going to be excited about calling me back, right?
I would just say no, thank you.
But James 5:16 says that if we confess our sins to each other and pray for each other, we'll be healed. What I love about that is the each other part, right? It isn't if I confess my sins to you and then you pray for me, I'll be healed. It's that if we confess our sins to each other and pray for each other, we'll be healed. And so I think, to me, that's the requirement. Am I willing to be vulnerable? Am I willing to be held accountable? Am I willing to hold people accountable? And then we can do that. A sponsor, we often say, should have a year of recovery, should have completed a step study, all of those things. But really, come to CR, get involved in a group, listen if you're in a women's group for a woman who's sharing that you're like, ooh, I want that. If you're in a men's group, listen for a man who's sharing and says something, you're like, ooh, I want that. And then talk to them. Are you a sponsor? No, I'm not sponsoring anybody right now, but here's somebody. That's how that's going to happen.
Yeah, I would say for accountability, it's somebody that is who's going to encourage you. You know, who's a cheerleader, who's alongside you, who wants that same healing and recovery in your life that you're after, and that you trust. Trust is going to be the key component across both. And then the difference between that and a sponsor is just somebody who is ahead of the journey.
Yep.
Yeah, that's great. Last question on this one. When's the next time that CR starts? I think they may be talking about step studies. I'm
so
assuming.
step studies are open. I know that Megan is doing that on a release schedule now. I'm not sure when the next ones are. I think maybe
it might be January.
September or January. I think I'm not sure exactly, but
September. Oh, there we go.
I knew you would know. And so if you come to Celebrate Recovery, and in the meantime, if you text the word recovery, I think, to 83,000, you'll get the texts and stuff about recovery, about Celebrate Recovery. But again, the step studies are one part of the program. CR never closes. So every Friday night, 52 weeks a year, we're going to be here.
At Lake Forest. It's on Friday nights.
And then, we're at the ranch on Mondays, and we're at some different campuses. But here at Lake Forest, every Friday night, I'll never forget the time in March 2020 that we were putting up signs saying that Celebrate Recovery would not be meeting tonight because of the pandemic. I'll never forget that. It had not happened in 30 years, and God willing, it will never happen again. But that was the only time we didn't meet. And we've met on Christmas night, we've met on New Year's night, we've met on, our birthdays and anniversaries, whenever it is. And so it will be the step studies, they open up a little bit later, but you don't have to wait to get in the step study. In fact, people used to say that the step study is like where the real work of recovery happens. I don't like that. The real work of recovery happens every time you go to recovery. The step studies just add another thing. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's great. Well, thank you guys so much.
Yeah, thank you.
This has been great.
Yeah.
That's been great.
Thanks, guys.
Awesome.
Thank you.
So we got mental health support groups. We got our family grace groups for those of you who have loved ones who are living with a mental health issue. We have our support groups for that. We have both an in-person and we have online versions of both of these. We also have Living Grace as well. If you are living with a mental health issue, we have support groups for you. Again, in person as well as online. So we've got a lot of opportunities there for you. You can see the website there for support groups at saddleback.com/care/support groups if you want to get more information on that. Let's see if I hit the next one. Nope, you guys have to do it for me, I think. All right, there we go. Here's how to get involved. We have our mental health community. We have counselor training. How many of you have done counselor training? Any of you guys done counselor training? Okay, you don't have to be a counselor when you're done to take counselor training. So if you'd like to just check it out and see, and along the way, maybe God will call you into that. That's great. So we have that counselor training. You watch videos online where we train you, and then we have both in-person and a Zoom version for practice and all of that to be able to integrate. So really good program. If you don't like my voice, I apologize. You'll have to listen to me a little bit in there because I do some of the training, but that's the way it goes. We have support groups, all kinds of support groups. We've got Breathe coming up as well. You see CR, and we have prayer. Do we have our prayer people here? In the back, you can see our prayer team back there. If you need prayer, we would love to pray with you. So we're back there. We also have, on the next slide here, we have Breathe coming up. And so we have an online retreat for parents of children with mental illness. It's coming up on Saturday, July 8th from 9 to 12. And you can see the website there to get more information. This is always a really great event. And so if you haven't been to that before, I would highly recommend it because it's just great to be around other folks who are in the same space, just like we get to do here. And then finally, if you look for next month, we have Dr. Esther Park and Dr. Midgen Park coming. They're from the Oak Health Center, and so they'll be with us next month. They're both in psychiatry, and so their psychiatrists will come and talk to us about mental health. And they're local, so it'll be good to get to know them as well. All right, well, before we go, I'd like to just, if I could, let's close this in a word of prayer, and we'll go from there. Jesus, we thank you. Thank you that we get to be in this community. Thank you that we get to gather and talk about health and wholeness and all the components of our mental health, as well as how it affects our spiritual health and our physical health. All the things that you're concerned about, Jesus, because you love us. You created us. You know every cell in our body, and it's just so neat that we get together and share this. We know that you're here in our midst as well, because you tell us as we gather in your name, you're here. And so I pray, Lord, that as we leave, we would experience your love, your grace, your presence, and that we would walk away just filled from what we've learned today. In your Son's name we pray. Amen.